think that when you look at the reductions, when you look at the draft plan, understand that there is nothing on there that is good for education. There's nothing there that's good for education. We as a school district in 2008 made reductions that really brought us down pretty significantly. 17 teachers alone in those reductions. That got us down to a position where we simply were doing the best we could with as little as we could. And now we're continuing to have to reduce. And so we've gone beyond, people like to say trimming the fat. School districts trimmed the fat around 2002, 2003, and it's continued to go down from there. There wasn't any fat left after 2008. And so now we're really looking at continued reductions that we think are maybe the most logical to make, but certainly not in the best interest of children. So as we go through this presentation, I just want to share a little bit with you about why this is happening and how it's impacting the Boone schools. Obviously, the most important thing and the reason we're here is because of the children. That's what we come and do every day. That's why we're here. There are many teachers in the audience, many support staff. That's why they come to work every day to support them. So we know that what we're doing tonight and what we're talking about is not necessarily good for the children, but it is an obligation of our school district, like other school districts, to stay within the fiscal means that are allowed through the state formula for funding schools. As an example, you may have read some of these headlines. This from January regarding the Ames schools, the Davenport schools, Southeast Polk reducing 28 staff members. One on Keokuk reducing $700,000. We're seeing at the university level with UNI making reductions that were a huge issue just a week or so ago. We're even seeing it in the city areas. Lots of different reductions happening throughout the state. So we're not alone in this. This is kind of the trend that is happening for schools and for public entities in Iowa. This is our 10-year expenditure budget. And as we look at that, what you can see is that we've continued to increase expenditures. And if you look at that 0% increase, you can see that in 2007, there was a fairly significant increase. That was when we purchased some furniture and things for the middle school. So things jumped fairly significantly. At the same time, that was a time where we found out that we had to reduce some funds, and I'll explain that in a minute. But we went down, this is when we cut 17 teaching positions and other staff positions and made other reductions in the district. Since that time, we have made some increases to try and bring that back up and provide the education we'd like to provide for our students. Unfortunately, we've now gotten to a position where our goal is a 0% increase for this year. And as you know, a 0% increase might likely mean reductions, because there are a lot of increases that happen. There are salary increases that are negotiated. There are fuel increases, utility increases, things that are continuing to happen. And so even though we're trying to get to a 0% increase, the impact of that actually is some reductions. We've also had some significant reductions in categorical funding that I'll share with you in just a minute. As we look at our 13-year trend for spending authority, and our spending authority is what we're allowed to spend. Doesn't matter how much money we got to have more than our spending authority to spend it. But if we have more than the spending authority, we can't spend above that. So we have a certain amount that we're allowed by formula to spend, no matter what. If our cash is above the spending authority, we can spend up to that spending authority. If our cash is below the spending authority, we can spend up to the amount of cash we have. So that's controlled by a formula that's legislative. We don't have control over that amount of money. It's not one of those things where we can go out and say, guys, we'd like to do this, and so we're going to tax people more, and the community says, yes, tax us more, we'll pay more for better schools. We're limited in how much money we can actually spend. So as we look at this, you can see where we are now in 2012. If we had a 3% increase each of the next 3 years, you can see that in 3 years, our spending authority would be down to 0. And we would be in financial straits. If you look back here to 2008, our spending authority was $15,000. That's why we had to make the reductions we had to make. Over that time, the board has worked very hard to bring that spending authority back up and get it between a policy-driven amount of 10 to 20% so that we have money backing up what we're trying to spend. If we start losing that, start spending that money, we get below that 10% area and we start to run into trouble very quickly. If we look at a 0% increase, which is what our planning is for this year, you can see that it levels off right at about that 10% range. So the difference between 3% is a trend that goes this way versus 0% is a trend that kind of flattens out at 2%. So that is why we're working toward a 0% increase, to maintain the spending authority that we need to have to remain solvent as a school district. Each year we get allowable growth. This is legislated. This year we get 316,000 allowable growth. We have about 46,000 that is a budget adjustment. So our total amount is 270,000 of available new money. Our cash balance is the amount of cash the district has available. We have more cash than we do spending authority. Our spending authority is the amount of cash the district has the authority to spend. So as we talk about spending authority, that's the thing to remember. If you have a little more cash, you can't spend it unless you have the authority to spend it. A lot of school funding is categorical, meaning those categories have been established and defined as what you can use that for. Let me give you a very good example. Many of you voted for the bond issue, and we appreciated 81% support for that. It was incredible. So we're getting about $21 million through a couple of funds to do this high school project. People may come out and say, why don't you take some of that $21 million and put it into teacher salaries to save teaching positions? The problem is that that bond issue is defined and is categorical in how we can spend it. Exactly what's said on the ballot is the only thing we can spend it for. So basically we can spend it for buildings, furniture, and technology for the building. And we can only do it for the high school. We can't say we need some repair down at Franklin Elementary for an old restroom that we didn't get to when we were modeled before, although restrooms are in good shape at Franklin. Bad example. But we can't take money from the high school and put it into Franklin. We can't take money from the high school and put it into salaries for teachers. So categorical funding really limits the flexibility in how we use those funds. Our categorical funding has taken a hit, and this is due to the economy. For instance, English is a second language. We receive funding to fund teachers to support students who needed English as a second language support. Our funding has gone this year from $65,000 to $15,000. So we've lost about $50,000 in funding for that program. We're reducing from 1.5 teachers to a half teacher over this. We went from 1.5 last year to 1 this year, and the proposal is to go to a half-time teacher next year. Half-time teacher will, $15,000 will not fund a half-time teacher. So that money will have to come from the general fund for other educational expenditures. Preschool program, this primarily impacts the preschool, but the legislature reduced funding from 6/10 to 5/10 last year. That was a $69,000 reduction. And then there was some definition on how that money could be utilized, which caused another impact for us. So a total of $102,000 that had been previously allocated for preschool. Title I. Title I is a reading and math program to support students who are struggling academically in the elementary areas in reading and math. We received $235,000 this year. We are a school in need of assistance because of low test scores for our special education students, at Franklin Elementary and in the 5th and 6th grade. So we are losing some funding that has to go to other programs to support different things than Title I has been supporting. So we're losing $57,000 there, which in essence is a teacher. Title II, early child, or excuse me, the class size reduction funding, we're losing about $20,000 there, again through sign-up. Dropout prevention, we were able to fund about $890,000 this last year. We're down to about $790,000 this year in that area because of some restricted definitions on how that money could be spent. It was very broadly interpreted for several years. We utilized it to fund several programs. As the Department of Education has looked at that closer, they have narrowed the definition, and as a result, we haven't been able to fund as many things from that. For instance, we used to fund 25% of our nursing salaries from there. We've lost $33,000 in nursing salaries because the Department of Education said this year, after several years of doing it, that we could no longer fund any nursing out of dropout prevention. Education job funds is where we're getting our biggest hit. Remember the ARPA funds a few years ago that were the American Recovery Act funds that President Obama put in place? We received a lot of funds there. After the first year of that, we then received education job funds, and it was $372,000. And the intent of that was to provide funding for the school district that would, in essence, maintain positions until the economy improved enough that we could cover it ourselves. Well, as we know, the economy hasn't improved as rapidly as maybe hoped for, and the result is that we're losing this money this year, or next year. We will no longer get that $372,000, but, and as a result, we will have to reduce some of those positions. So if you look at that summary, we've lost about $702,000 in categorical funding to the Boone schools. Looking at the last few years, (2010-11), our new money was $126,000. Our budget increased $913,000. About half of that, a little less than half of that, was personnel costs. 2011-12, our new money was $55,000. Our expenditure increase was $927,000, and a little more than half of that was personnel costs. This is when part of that personnel cost increase, while much of it was negotiated, some of it was also an effort to recover some of those 17 jobs lost in 2008 and make up for some of the things that we weren't able to do. We hope that that would be able to continue on. Unfortunately, we haven't recovered economically enough to continue to carry that through. So this year, our new money is $270,000. Our categorical loss is $702,000. So our new money is a minus $432,000. That's a very simplified explanation of what's happening with school funding. School funding is extremely complicated. But part of what that tells you is that $372,000 we lost in federal funding, well, that's most of that. That's where our biggest challenge is. 79% of our Boone Community School District budget expenditures are salary and benefits. I started in Iowa 12 years ago, and at that time, most school districts were about 70%. As those reductions have happened over the last 12 years because of loss of funding, other areas have been cut, and yet some salaries have continued to increase. And it's continued to adjust a little bit, so that percent of salaries and benefits of the general fund budget has gone up. Other things impact the budget. Salary and benefits are negotiated. Somebody's going to say, well, why don't you negotiate a lower salary? Well, part of the challenge with negotiations is that if you don't come to an agreement, you have to do a thing called arbitration. And when you go to arbitration, they look at the average settlement in the state and try and move you toward that. Again, that's kind of a simplified explanation, but that's basically what happens. The average settlement in the state so far this year is 3.47%, and the average new money on that is 0.5%. We have not settled yet. We're still working on that. Hopefully we can settle a little lower, but we don't know if we'll be able to. And if not, if we go to arbitration, we're going to have to look at what the state average is, because that will impact us. Of course, fuel costs are going up, utilities, other types of things continue to increase. So as we look at maintaining a 0% expenditure increase, we're looking at 0% for next year. For every dollar increase of the 2011-12 expenditures, there must be an equal dollar reduction. Continue to utilize categorical funds effectively. Consider attrition opportunities where appropriate with the least impact on student achievement. As you look at the draft reduction plan, you can see that several of those reductions are based on attrition. One of the things that we're looking at doing next year is an early retirement program. You say, well, how can you do an early retirement program if you don't have as many funds? Because early retirement comes out of the management fund. Salaries come out of the general fund. So if we have somebody retire early, we can pay them out of the management fund, and that's taxed to you. But we can save that money in the general fund, which is the educational fund. So if we're able to reduce positions through that, we save money considerably in the area where we're short of funding, and that's in the general fund. And then finally, consider attrition opportunities, and consider other non-mandatory options furthest from the classroom that have least impact on student achievement. So that's kind of a general overview of what's happened and why we're in the position we are. What I'd like to do now is turn it back over to Dr. Anderson and the Board of Education. And the administrators, along with the Board of Education, will be glad to answer your questions. I believe, Jeff, you would like them to come to the microphone if they have a question? Yes. Thank you.